it feels like you woke up from a dream, and the dream was the person you thought you were. And all of a sudden, you're outside of it and seeing it like, holy smokes, that was my reality. That's who I thought I was. That's who I felt I was.
What actually is spiritual awakening? So I want to start there. If you can share your sense, your definition, your working understanding, what is spiritual awakening?
Well, first of all, the word awakening, I think, is an interesting one. It's become so common that we can forget, like, this is a really important word. It's because it's very instructive to what happens. In the midst of all sorts of spiritual experiences and all kinds of experiences of all kinds that can happen, strange, or they can be drug-induced, or all sorts of things. Most of them don't have an awakening. It's like a shift of consciousness. I go, oh, I'm in this different state of consciousness. Whereas the awakening, the part for me that makes it awakening, because it does in a very concrete way, very literal way, it feels like you woke up from a dream, and the dream was the person you thought you were. And all of a sudden, you're outside of it and seeing it like, holy smokes, that was my reality. That's who I thought I was. That's who I felt I was. That was me. And then all of a sudden, it's like I became lucid or something in a dream, and all of a sudden there's this other reality also. It's the popping almost in that other reality that casts this first one. If that's all we know, that's all we know. And then all of a sudden, you're out here. And you're, wait a minute. If I'm out here, that's who I thought I was. And now I'm somewhere else. I'm something else. And that insight, that sort of aha, that's the awakening to me.
Now, one of the things I've heard you say, Adya, and it really got my attention, is that it's a myth that spiritual awakening, or traditionally using a term like enlightenment, is something that is reserved for just a few rarefied human beings. That you see that the time we're in is a time when spiritual awakening is a lot more accessible to a lot more people en masse even. That's my I'm adding that in, the en masse language. And I'm curious if you have evidence for that, if this is just an inner observation that you're making. Where does this come from? And do you think this is really true?
Up until very recently, 30, 40 years, any notion of enlightenment was linked to almost being a superman or a superwoman, and that it was linked very much within sort of quite strict religious context. So I think there's something very powerful about the spiritual impulse breaking free from the sort of religious or doctrinaire impulse. They're always going to be, that doesn't mean I have any problem with religion. I think religion has contained that impulse and given, structure and images and all that for centuries. But I think that's a big part of the reason. And in people's minds, what I found is when you stop thinking, like this whole awakening or enlightenment thing is rare and for the few, and a lot of it all of a sudden becomes much more available, because we do tend to live out whatever we believe. And if some of those beliefs are self-limiting, there's a good likelihood we'll live those beliefs out. And then that living them out will seem to confirm that, yes, it is rare. So I've just watched as a teacher, when I can see in people's eyes, they kind of shift out of that, this could never happen to me, or it's for the rare. When they realize, like, no, this is part of a natural human experience. It's been happening for centuries, and like almost since there was human beings on the face of the planet. It's I think of it as almost like like a spiritual instinct. And as soon as people start to be in the presence and see that something's happening for other people, they're like, I'm like all these other people. And so these unconscious limitations we put on, I think, are very powerful. And to whatever extent they start to be lifted, which I think is part of what's happening now, as chaotic as that is, everything becomes possible. Yeah, because I think it's a very, very natural human impulse, and always has been.